Tulsi Gabbard joins us now to explain more. Good to see you, Congresswoman. I don't know if you still want to be called Congresswoman, but thanks for being here. Let's talk first about the reaction of your fellow Democrats to your announcement. What's the reaction been?
I got to be honest, I've heard directly from a couple who have been encouraging and gave me good feedback. I've heard a lot of expected hatred and vitriol coming from the mainstream media establishment in Washington, the permanent Washington, the Democratic Party elite, all trotting out the same old tired criticisms that have nothing to do with substance. And this has been part of the problem all along that I talked about in my announcement. Why I've left the party is because this party is now controlled by fanatical ideologues who don't believe in freedom, Sean. They don't believe that we can have different opinions. They don't believe that I or you or anyone should have the right to express our views if they disapprove of what those views are. And they will seek to smear us, criticize us, silence us, work with big tech to censor us and suppress these God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution. And the danger of that is when you have a political party that does not believe in freedom, that is in power, they have the ability to use the force of the government and law enforcement to enforce that suppression and that undermining of our freedoms.
In that speech, I paid very close attention to what you were saying. It's conform or be canceled. Yes. You spoke about the importance of defending what it means to be a woman. You talked about those that deny biological differences between a man and a woman are not only erasing women as a category of people, but they are denying the existence of objective reality and truth. And you even went further, and you have woke politicians and a Supreme Court justice who are unable and unwilling to define what a woman is or defend women's sports when female athletes object to competing against biological males. You thought long, hard, and deeply about these positions before you did this. So what is the reaction to that? Because I would imagine in this woke world, probably that sparked a lot of backlash and anger also.
It sparked a lot of backlash and anger from the expected places, from these very same so-called woke fanatical ideologues that are in control of today's Democratic Party. But, Sean, I also want to share that I got a lot of messages from both people I know, but even more from people I've never met from across this country who expressed hope in their reaction, who felt emboldened and inspired that they, too, don't have to self-censor and cower in the corner for fear of, being canceled or smeared or losing their job. They've created this culture of fear. We need more people to step up. If we believe in our freedom of speech, we have to step up and use it and go out and vote accordingly in this next election, which is why I've invited Democrats who feel as sickened as I do about today's Democratic Party, leave, move forward, and put our country first.
Let's talk a little bit more about you and what led up to this decision, and how do you now define yourself politically, and do you have political ambitions moving forward?
I am an independent, and I am focused on two main things. It is continuing to fight for the freedoms that are under attack in this country and continuing to hold our leaders' feet to the fire, President Biden and his allies in Congress who are pushing us to the brink of nuclear war, placing our future, the future of the American people, humanity and the world at risk. These are the things that I'm asking voters to consider as they go towards the polls, because if we do nothing, if we just stand by and allow President Biden to continue to push us over the brink of nuclear war, we may not see a tomorrow or a next month or a next year. These are the most important things right now.
I know people have criticized you for your comments about what is happening in Ukraine and Vladimir Putin, et cetera. Vladimir Putin now is bombing civilian targets indiscriminately, killing innocent men, women, and children. And I would argue first that it should be Western Europe's problem more than ours. They're not a member of NATO, Ukraine. And now he's threatening nuclear weapons. So my question to you is, what should America's role in the world be when you have a hostile actor, a thug and a murderer of innocent women and children, in this case Putin? What should the world's reaction be, and what should America's reaction be? How should do we stand by and say that's your problem, or do we have a moral obligation to say we're not going to let anybody kill innocent men, women, and children?
Well, first I'll say President Biden has been enacting policies and actions that have further escalated this war, rather than exercising the opportunity and responsibility that he has as the President of the United States to work to bring these parties together, de-escalate, and come to a negotiated, peaceful solution. Now, some will say, well, Tulsi, that's impossible, or that's naive to think about. I will point those people back to the words that President Kennedy
if I may,
gave.
We can have a dialogue about it. If you look at it, though, he invaded a sovereign country.
Yes.
He's claiming it to be his own. If anyone said Hawaii is ours, I know it's your home state. I don't think you would like that, and you would want America to come defend you, wouldn't you?
Well, Hawaii is a part of the United States, so yes, that would be a problem for the United States.
By the way, one of the nicest parts of the United States, and you're separate and apart. I don't blame you. But do we, in other words, once somebody invades a country and kills innocent men, women, and children, does the world have an obligation to stop it early? Or do you give in to nuclear blackmail? Somebody could just say, oh, I'm going to nuke you if you dare support Ukraine or whatever country it happens to be.
The path that we are on has been escalating and making this war worse.
I'm not asking that
has
part.
increased. But you got to let me answer. You got to let me answer here, Sean.
Obligation is. Because I have a hard time.
Okay, so if the moral obligation is to do what we can to end the suffering of the Ukrainian people who are suffering death and destruction, it is to bring about an end to this war as quickly as possible. President Biden has failed to do that, and he has failed the American people, the people of Ukraine, and the world in doing that.
Tulsi Gabbard, thank you. We appreciate it. Fascinating interview, and we appreciate you always coming on. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.